Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Richie here and this is Derry After Dark. Today I want to talk to you about something that you're probably seeing quite a lot in the meta at the moment, which is dragons, toughness 6 monsters, and how do the dwarves deal with them. This can also be taken into other armies that can kind of do the same things that we can, but today we're going to be exploring how to deal with those massive pain in the arses which are T6 monsters and above. As pretty much everybody's aware, T6 monsters are unfortunately very prevalent in the meta at the moment, and it can seem quite difficult to be able to deal with them. As most of your army is going to be wounding them on either 5s or 6s, it's just a real struggle sometimes to be able to break through that, and then on top of that, they can get double saves or triple saves with a 2-up normal save, a 5-up ward, and then a 5-up regen. Some things can even get down to a 4-up ward, which then means it's absolute nightmare to try and get through. If any of you have been to tournaments, then you've seen that there's a high prevalence of dragons, but people seem to be doubling down on them nowadays, so they'll be taking 2 dragons or 3 dragons if they can. Also with the Tomb Kings list, taking the Necrosphinxes and a dragon, so you could potentially be playing against 3 toughness 6 monsters. Now if your army doesn't have something that can deal with these, unfortunately you're probably going to be in for quite a bad day. But by Grudge, I am going to show you how to deal with the toughness 6 monsters. Unfortunately, in the dwarves, there is no easy answer to this. There's a lot of armies out there that are doing really well into the current meta, and this is because they counter the toughness 6 monsters and kind of counter each other at the same time. So this would be Bretonnians with their monstrous killing blow, rerolls the hit through virtues. It just means that they've got a higher percentage chance of rolling that 6 and one bagging that behemoth. Once the opponent loses such a hefty chunk of their points, it's a really uphill battle for them to try and pull that back. That's why high maneuverable armies with access to monstrous killing blow are doing really well right now. Unfortunately, as some of you are probably quite aware, the dwarves are neither highly maneuverable, and we do not really have access to monstrous killing blow outside of Ungrim. I don't unfortunately rate Ungrim that much. The problem is he just doesn't have the best save, and if you put him toe to toe with a dragon, unless you're going to be hitting first, which you're probably not going to be charging, the dragon is probably going to munch you. You do have a ward save against killing blow, but I just couldn't trust that, unfortunately. So we're going to talk through some of the best ways that I've found to be able to deal with toughness 6 monsters. Unfortunately, sometimes these don't work. You need skill, you need luck, and you need the dice to be in your favour as well. The dwarves are quite a hard army to use, but when you can pull off that win, it is very gratifying. And when you can bring down those toughness 6 monsters, it just feels amazing. So firstly, I want to talk about combat res. So one of the best ways to deal with the dragons coming in and charging you is to out combat res them. Most dragons that are going to be charging into you have close order, which means they have a static combat res of 1. Then they're going to try and do as many wounds to you as they possibly can to be able to win that combat. So what you need to do to be able to counter this is have a unit that has a high combat res. Now, if you issue a challenge against that dragon, then the max overkill that dragon can only do to you is 6. Because in the rules, the overkill is 5, and then you get the 1 for killing the champion. So that would be 6 combat res, and then the +1 for close order. So that would be 7. Now, if you can get your unit to combat res 7 naturally, then you are winning because you have a musician, which breaks ties. So suddenly you can win combat, potentially double outnumber that dragon if you've got quite a lot of models in the unit, and then run them down. Because if you double outnumber something, it loses its chance to fall back in good order and only has give ground or flee. So trying to double outnumber these is quite handy. The way that you can get to static combat res of 7 is by taking a combat block. So you're going to be starting with close order. You're going to try to have 2 ranks. That takes you to 3. Then you're going to have a banner in that unit. And then on that banner, you're going to take the rune of battle. And then also in the unit, you're going to add a hero. So this is either a Thane or a Runesmith BSB, and you're going to be taking them as your battle standard bearer. And then on that BSB, you're going to be taking another rune of battle. And yes, as it is written, they are intended, they do stack if you have 2 different banners in the same unit. All these things in conjunction take you to a static combat res of 7. This is the magic number to be able to beat those dragons if you challenge out with a champion. But there is a much better way that you can do this to try and win combat by even more. With this, you want to take either a king or a Thane. You could even do this as your BSB. You've all seen my BSB build, which is try to be as tanky as possible. So you want to have a super tanky hero And potentially in Royal Clans, you can even make one that's slightly killy as well to be able to try and get some wounds onto the dragon. You want to be taking something like the Master Rune of Gromril for a 2-up save, the Rune of Preservation to be able to stop killing blow and multi-wounds just in case they've got the Ogre Blade or anything that can do multi-wounds to you, or potentially the Master Rune of Adamant taking you up to Toughness 10. That means that any dragon is going to be wounding you on 6s, as Strength 6 from the dragon still needs 6s to wound Toughness 10. So any of these that you're using to challenge out a dragon means that you're going to take a lot less wounds, the dragon's going to get a lot less combat res, and you're going to be able to win by greater value. If the dragon can't do any wounds to your combat block because it's in a challenge with a character that it can't possibly hurt, it's suddenly only combat res 1 when you're combat res 7, which then means that you win by 6. And if you double outnumber them at that point, suddenly they're going to have to roll very low or they're going to be fleeing, which you can then try to chase them down or at least take them out of the fight for the next 2 turns, which will then give you time to try and mop up the rest of the army without having to deal with the dragon too much. A fun little tactic that I quite like to use with this is setting up my army in a corner so that I can try and angle the unit the dragon's coming into at a slight angle facing towards the corner. So when the dragon hits me and I can potentially make it either fall back in good order or flee, you can then push the dragon off the board. This is always the easiest way to try to kill a dragon, because if a model's base slightly leaves the board, it's dead and out the game. I've done this on several occasions, it is quite fun. It does take a little bit of pre-planning beforehand, so if you can set into that corner and you know the dragon's going to be charging into one of your units, angle the unit so it faces slightly towards the corner and try and push that dragon off. Another technique you can use is using the same combat brick style, but if you're playing against a good general, what they'll try to do is avoid that brick as much as they possibly can. So if you set up a slightly weaker unit next to it that doesn't have the BSB in, for instance, right next to them, and potentially a unit with stubborn as well, I would potentially use Iron Drakes for this. You could even use a small unit of Iron Breakers potentially, something that you know can at least kind of hold its own. You put this as a bait unit next to your close combat brick. What this does is it means that a dragon is probably more likely to charge into that because it thinks it's going to be easy points. You put your challenge hero into that unit, so the dragon is more likely to charge into that one unit because it knows it can't win against the big static combat res block. But once it's stuck there, as long as you're angled right, the combat block can charge into the flank of the dragon, and then you've got even more static combat res, and hopefully actually try to kill that dragon. Another thing that you can do is expanding frontages. If your unit is drilled, you can expand your frontage by 5 if you lose combat, or if you're drilled, every time that you win combat as well. As long as you're not stuck there and you do actually get to make a follow-up move. This can get really spicy if you're playing Royal Clans, because if you make any follow-up move, you're suddenly at +1 strength. So your Longbeards using their great weapons can be strength 7, which is wounding most dragons on 3s unless they've buffed their toughness. Obviously, if you're locked in a challenge, you won't be able to attack with your combat brick, but it's the combat res that you're after to be able to try and push that dragon away from you. Hopefully do some cheeky overruns, because you'd be quite wide, you actually might be able to catch the dragon. Another thing that you can do is charge a gyrocopter into the rear of the dragon that you've positioned earlier in the game to be able to try to make this charge. Hiding it behind buildings or just keeping out of line of sight of the dragon will mean that it won't just get charged and killed straight away. What this does is when the dragon loses combat against the big brick, it then has to take a perils test coming through you or lose a wound. But what it also means is that you have a model behind that dragon that has movement 9 and swift stride, which means that you're really likely to catch the dragon if you can get it fleeing. Plus a rear charge gives you +2 to your combat res, which then suddenly means you're winning by absolutely loads. And the dragon won't be able to attack backwards if it is engaged in a challenge. So those are the best techniques to use against the solo dragon that's coming at you and you want to try and beat it with combat res. That is definitely a good tactic, and if you haven't been doing this, I would really suggest doing it. There's no way that a single dragon can win combat against a static combat res 7 brick. As long as you've got something to challenge out in that unit, it physically can't win. If you prefer shooting and you don't really want to try and get stuck in combat with a dragon, what you could do is to try and plink wounds off it and take it off the board before it gets anywhere near you. Unfortunately, they do have such great move. You're only going to be getting 1 or 2 turns and potentially a stand and shoot into the dragon. I found that it's quite hard to kill them from afar, and you do need to try and deal with them when they get close to you. But if you want to plink some wounds off to make your life a little bit easier, you could potentially run a few units of the Iron Drakes. 3 minimum units of Iron Drakes, all with the Trollhammer Torpedo, can make quite light work, as they're going to be AP3 with the Trollhammer Torpedo. Hitting at long range on 4s if they've moved, or 3s if they haven't moved, is really nice. And then you get some ablative strength 5 shots within 18 as well, which is always quite handy. Those unfortunately be wounded on 5s, compared to the Trollhammer Torpedoes wounding a dragon on a 2. So if the behemoth is quite lightly armoured, these can make very light work of them. Something else to consider, which I really like, and if you've watched many of the videos now, you've probably heard me talking about them lots, but Grudge Throwers. Grudge Throwers are absolutely amazing because you can potentially do lots and lots of wounds to a dragon. If you have 3 Grudge Throwers and you manage to roll 3 direct hits, I mean, the likelihood of that happening is quite slim, but it can happen. I've done it, so it can definitely happen. Suddenly these are at -3 because you've hit onto your target. So those dragons that are on a 5-up save are suddenly on a 5-up, 5-up, 5-up if they're a trip save dragon, which because this is a dice game, they can fail those. And suddenly you could do 4, 8, 12 damage to a dragon in just one salvo from the Grudge Throwers. Now, one of the best things about these is if the dragon is hiding behind buildings and doesn't want to pop out till later turns to try and rinse your army in the final turns, you can just keep peppering that dragon every single turn with the bombard rule. Because dragon bases are quite big, usually a 2-inch scatter in most directions will be able to be a direct hit, and sometimes a 4-inch scatter as well. I cannot talk down how good these are at killing behemoths. Unfortunately, these are a bit of a gambling piece because in some games they won't do anything, but sometimes they will win you the game. I don't know how many times you've been playing against dragons or behemoth and you've got them down to 1 or 2 wounds left, and then they've decided to screw this and fly away on their 1 or 2 wounds out of your line of arc, so you can't shoot them, you can't charge them because you've only got little stunty legs, and suddenly you can't reach them. But the Grudge Throwers can keep peppering them every turn after that, and you could potentially bring them down, getting you the points, and points mean prizes. I would make an honorary mention to cannons. Unfortunately, the Dwarf cannons just aren't as good as the Empire cannons for bringing down behemoths. The Empire cannons can just sit on the back of the board with a much longer range, strength 10 and AP 3 natively. They are just so much better than ours. But with strength 8, we still are wounding on 2s, and cannons are very, very likely to hit as well. As long as you pick a point that's either 10 inches from the back of the base or potentially 7 inches from the front, you are statistically very likely to be able to hit your target. And if you have an engineer close by for rerolls, you should be able to hit that behemoth as long as you have line of sight to it. The biggest problem with the Dwarf cannons is the AP and the damage. Unfortunately, those 2-up save dragons are going to be getting a 4-up save against it, which is really annoying, and then it's D3, so you're only probably going to do 1 or 2 wounds, unfortunately, if you do manage to sneak one through. So if you just want something that hits all the time, the cannons are worth it, but I think for more damage potential, definitely the Grudge Throwers and the Iron Drakes. If you're playing Royal Clans, I could also suggest taking some of the Bolt Throwers with the Rune of Skewering on. Making them strength 7 means that they're going to be wounding most dragons on 3s and then no armor saves allowed. You do manage to take one of those armor saves away, which is quite good. If you can drop a dragon down to only 2 saves, you are more likely to do damage to it. Unfortunately, at long range, they are going to be hitting on 5s, which is a nightmare, to be perfectly honest. I never roll anything above about a 4, so I try and probably steer clear of these. I did take these to a few tournaments. They did okay, but I've had some games where I haven't hit with 3 Bolt Throwers for the entire game. If you've had better success than me, please, you can rub it in my face. So next up, I'd like to talk to you about Dragon Slayers. Now, I know, they're rubbish. Slayers are terrible. I know, I've been on the internet. I've played games. But the Dragon Slayers do have a very useful rule that I think is quite slept on that can be useful when dealing with dragons. The Slayer of Dragons. When this character makes a roll to wound, the roll of a 4-up is always a success, regardless of the target's toughness, and in addition, any unsaved wounds inflicted by this character against an enemy model whose type is Behemoth has multi-wounds D3. This can be quite spicy when you pair this with some of the runes that they can take on their weapons or the runic tattoos. Something like Endless Battle for exploding hits could be really good. Alric the Mad, I think, is a must-take for this. Getting rid of armor saves completely and doing D3 damage is really, really nice with these. You do unfortunately have to charge with these because a dragon will absolutely munch you. But what you could do is keep these as a bit of backfield protection, and if a dragon gets into your lines, then charge this little guy out and try and do a load of wounds to that dragon. I would 100% put the Rune of Dishonor tattoo onto this Slayer as well. If the dragon does munch it, if you don't manage to kill it, it doesn't give any points away. So I think this is quite a nice little glass hammer that you could use to try and take a few wounds off that dragon. Now, if you've done a few wounds on the way in with Grudge Throwers or those Trollhammer torpedoes, you could potentially kill it with this model. This is really fun because most people don't think that a Slayer could do much against a dragon, but from my experiences, they can punch a lot higher than their pay grade. If you're playing against dragons that aren't a 2-up save, so if they've got a 3-up save or a 4-up save potentially, I mean, I don't know what those people are doing, but they are out there. You could potentially make use of the Master Rune of Slaying. Putting that on a Shooty King or a Shooty Thane. I would definitely suggest taking the Rune of Accuracy and the Rune of Rapid Fire onto this as well, so that you can get 2 shots that would do D3. So basically your character is becoming a cannon that always hits on 3s. The only problem with this, it is unfortunately only AP1 as a handgun. It does proc on 6s to be AP2, but the crossbow with a longer range is unfortunately AP0 procking to AP2 on a 6. You can get the extra armor bane through Forge Fire special ability from them, but I don't think that this is going to go too well into the really well saving dragons. It could be really good into Gorgons, anything that's lightly armoured, so into those gigantic spawns, 100% this is a really good tool. If we see lots more of the Wolves of the Sea, then I think this is going to be a really nice addition into your army. Unfortunately, it does struggle to deal with dragons that are on a 2-up save, but if they don't have as good of a save, then this can start to plink wounds off them. And it could be a cheeky little surprise when they charge your unit and you can stand and shoot with this and potentially do 6 wounds to them on the way in. Always wounded behemoths on 3s is also pretty nice, because hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, that is very, very consistent. And nobody can make all of their saves. I mean, I definitely can't. Something that we can do as dwarves is trying to bait the opponent to charge something that they think is going to be easier points to be able to get for themselves. Whether that be an anvil that you put right at the front of your lines, or potentially a unit of rangers or iron drakes that doesn't have too much started combat res. With the anvil, something that you can do is deploy that right at the front of your line, but give it the Rune of Adamant. So suddenly it's toughness 10, and like I said earlier, dragons are going to be wounding it on 6s, which means it is going to stick around and they're probably not going to be able to kill it. Between charging that or charging units that are combat res 7, they're probably going to choose the anvil, which means you can normally try and bait them into a charge because that's the closest thing. To them it looks like the easiest thing to kill, then suddenly they're stuck there, and then you can try and do pincer movement or just leave that alone, let that combat happen, and then destroy the rest of their army, and then you can win on points that way once you've dealt with the rest of their force, because they're playing at a 400 to 600 point disadvantage if that's locked in combat with your anvil for a couple of turns. Or then use the anvil as an anvil, see what I did there? And then potentially have your Dragon Slayer pop out from behind the anvil and charge into the dragon to try and do some wounds to it. Or just send in your big combat res block and try and munch him. So drawing people into unfavourable charges is something that I've talked about on this channel before. So if you have a small unit with Stubborn that's in front of your big combat brick, your opponent is likely to charge into that unit. Whether it be Iron Breakers that could just issue a challenge into that dragon, lose combat by however much, it doesn't matter, pop Stubborn, and then pop back through your unit. So suddenly the dragon's going to be in combat where you want it to be, or having that unit in front of your anvil that's toughness 10 to just keep the dragon pinned there for a couple of turns while you can maneuver the rest of your army to get around to either charge the dragon or to destroy some other units. Unfortunately, not really having access to monstrous killing blow outside of Ungrim is really, really hard for us. So it does mean that unfortunately our games into the behemoths are very difficult for us and it's hard to win, but it can be very gratifying for if you do manage to kill them. Something that I've been really enjoying at the moment in the Royal Clans list is taking a souped up king with the Master Rune of Gromril, the Rune of Preservation, and Master Rune of Smiting. So he's going to be able to survive against most things. If you put a Banner of Grugni into his unit as well, so he has a 5-up ward, he isn't getting killed by anything in one round. And then your attacks back, you can do D6 damage. It is only AP2 before Armor Bane with the Great Axe, so unfortunately a lot of dragons are going to have a 4-up save. But if they do manage to fail 2 of them, that's a potential of 12 damage that you can do straight to a dragon. I've been really enjoying this, and you can be quite fluid with where you put him. If you know that you're going to be charged straight away, and they definitely are coming for your combat brick, I would put your king in there. If you're trying to create a feint, put your king in a flanking unit that's right next to your big block. Then hopefully you can create a pincer movement and then do some damage and then kill the dragon that way after you've dealt some damage with the Rune of Smiting. Unfortunately, there is no easy way for us to deal with them. So it is going to take trial and error, and hopefully some of these techniques are helpful to you. The X-Force unfortunately doesn't have the best tools to be able to kill dragons. Don't get me wrong, you do have move and shoot artillery which can bring them down, or potentially taking a stupidly massive unit of handgunners to just try and shoot every shot into that dragon and potentially bring them down, but I just don't think that would be a good way to play. So the best way that an X-Force army can deal with dragons is by not dealing with them. Having the gyrocopters flying around, being a nuisance, getting out of charge arcs, making them try to charge them instead of your lines, that is the best way that X-Force can deal with them while killing the rest of the army to win you a game. Remember, you don't have to kill the dragon to be able to win a game. It's just quite nice when you do manage to bring them down. If you've had success playing into dragons, please let me know what you've been doing to be able to kill them. If you've managed to get the monstrous killing blow from Ungrim, please let me know. That would be absolutely glorious. I just haven't personally seen it in real life. I really want to. Let me know if you have any other techniques that you like to use as well. And thank you all for watching. I just really like to thank my newest channel member, Magic Machek. I really truly appreciate it. Down below, I also have an affiliate link for Firestorm Games. So if you want to buy any Dwarves from there, or just anything in general, please follow the link. That would really help me out as well. I also have a discount code down below with UK Resin Print, and he does a 15% discount for anyone that uses the code Dowie After Dark. And he stocks a wide range of different dwarf sculpts and any other race as well. So if you want to bargain, definitely head over to UK Resin Print. There is a link down below. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one. Enjoy killing those dragons, and let me know how many you managed to kill so we can strike off some grudges in the book. Take care. Goodbye.